All right, here you go. We are going to walk through what we did for class on Monday. For anybody that fell behind or was absent, then here's what we did. So follow along with us. Wish I could. Yeah, let me see if I can move these little handles a little more out of the way. Okay. So we added a new Part Studio tab to the same document. We're just kind of using our 3D CAD tools. We're demonstrating CAD tools. We don't worry about the exact dimensions at all today. It's more about just seeing some tools and menus and kind of getting some things to fire. So I'm going to say create Part Studio, and this one is going to be things from the Extrude menu. Now, the video, you guys can always pause, rewind, etc. So I'll go a little faster, and if you need to see something again, you can, right? You can control that on your own. So let's see. I think I used the top plane in class, right? There you go. No, yeah, a horizontal plane. Okay. So it's about the extrude menu, but I need a sketch to be able to extrude, right? So I'm going to sketch on the top plane, and you can use kind of any basic shape, but I used the polygon tool today in a lot of classes because some students didn't even know that we had a polygon tool. So I'm going to make a polygon. How the polygon tool works is the first click is the center. You kind of pull your finger or mouse right away, and then the second click basically sets the rough size to begin, and then it's not made yet. If you move your mouse or finger, you'll see that it's starting to change number of sides. So it takes a third click to lock in your polygon. Now, if you kind of didn't know that and you moved and clicked or something happened, right, and you have a shape, you're like, oh, I didn't mean to have that many sides, you'll see that you have this little number with an X. You can double click on that and you can change the number of sides of your polygon. Okay, so that's the polygon tool. It's not really our focus, but play around with that. All right, so what our focus is today is looking at things in the extrude menu that we haven't used yet. So I'm going to turn on extrude. Here's the little menu. I'm going to choose the shape, and I think what we've known so far, just to review, is that you have the ability to extrude a distance, which you could specify right here with a very exact, precise number. We have the ability to flip the direction to go, basically you're going to go perpendicular to the sketch plane. So we could, in this case, go up or down. And you might see this word blind. We did talk about blind today. You'll get to it again here in the video, but just to make sense of why do they have the word blind there? Well, if you click that, it's drop down and you'll see some other things. These other things generally are referring to geometry. So the idea of blind is like, hey, just follow my instructions. Just, how would you say it? Blindly follow my instructions. I don't know if you've ever heard somebody say that, but you're basically asking the extrusion to just go the distance without any regard for other geometry, for any regard for collisions, for impacts, for interference with other things. You're just like, just go 4 inches and be blind to anything else. As opposed to, hey, let's use geometry, other solid objects and reference points in my graphic window to guide the extrusion. Okay, so maybe that gives a little meaning to why they've got the word blind. Now, that's a basic extrusion. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to click on symmetric. So symmetric allows the extrusion to go in both directions, kind of up and down in this case, and the sketch stays in the dead center. That can be really useful at times for your sketch to remain in the middle. The exact distance we extrude today doesn't really matter. I'm going to accept that, and I'm going to go ahead and rename extrude 1 symmetric. Okay, so seeing that you have a symmetric tool. So now the sketch is in the middle, and that can be really handy. I'm going to start another sketch, and I'll use a polygon again maybe. How about a hexagon this time? Oh, I forget to, so I went to move my mouse too fast. Boom. Extrude. All right, this time what I had everyone do is to try clicking on draft underneath symmetric and to see if they could figure out what happens. What you should see happens is that it actually kind of tapers out or in, kind of flares out, whichever word you want to think. Now the angle that you're specifying is really, think of this point here, had it gone straight ahead, straight up, where it would have ended, think of a vertical line that would be right here. This flare out is really that angle here. So we're flaring out 15 degrees. Think about this angle, flaring that out, 45, where that would be, right? Where 60 would be, right? So this is a 60-degree angle from vertical to there, which this would be 30, the complement. If you were to go all the way to 90, this line would actually have to lay all the way flat, which means this point is now straight out to the side and you haven't really done an extrusion. So 90 doesn't work. You get an error, right? Nothing changed, it turned red. So this has to be something less than 90 degrees, okay? But that's what the draft does. Draft tapers or it kind of expands. All right, so you can also change if it goes out or in. So 40 degrees at that length and that distance was a lot, so let me back that off to say 10 degrees and show the example of where it tapered in instead of out. So play around with that, and I will rename this extrude draft. All right? Now, let's start another sketch. In this one, I made something that looked like the old Pizza Hut building roof. So I'm going to make a rectangle that is definitely not a square. So rectangular, very much, much longer than it is wide. Again, I'm not worried about direct dimensions today. I'm really just about showing things to click on and how I get different effects. So to start this one, I'm going to go ahead and extrude this rectangle up a little bit. I'm going to turn on draft and I'm going to make it go in instead of out. And in class, I thought 8 degrees looked pretty decent. So now that's not the end. So what's different? Because we just did that, right? What's different in this one? Do you remember when I used the symmetric button where I could kind of go both directions? Yeah, remember that? Okay. Well, I'm not going to use that this time, but it plants the idea that I can extrude in both directions at the same time. The problem with symmetric is it has to be equal, and I don't want to do it equally this time. I want to go the other way with a different set of parameters, and Onshape allows that right here. So underneath draft, there's a checkbox for second end position. Now that option is not there if symmetric's clicked because you're already going both directions, you just decided to do it symmetrically. So you have to make sure symmetric is turned off, and then you have the option to click second end position. Now with second end position, you have the ability to have this basically a second extrusion that is kind of independent in terms of the distance and draft angles. It can kind of be its own animal. And so what I did here is I turned on draft and I did a really extreme angle like 70 degrees, and I really just kind of visually played around with what looked good to me. So again, wasn't worried about the exact distance, but I flared that out a decent amount. And I said that this gave myself, so what is this extrusion? The point of that is draft second end position. Cool. So all of that came from one extrusion, right? So one shape can do two different things in different directions, right? Different distances, different angles. So that's pretty cool. So that's part 3. I'm going to rename that. To me, this looks like the Pizza Hut roof. I don't know if you know the old Pizza Hut buildings, but let's go ahead and make it red, like the old Pizza Hut building. So there you go. That's like the Pizza Hut roof. That's all from one quick little rectangle. That's pretty cool, right? All right, so then I wanted to show them another thing in the extrude menu, and this comes back to the word blind. So I started a sketch on this top surface. I'm not going to sketch on the top, but I used that as a reference plane so that I could sketch above the slope surface of the roof. And I used just making the analogy that we're maybe make a couple, tell you what, I'll come back and add another one later. Oh shoot, I lost my sketch, I didn't mean to. There you go. All right, so I've got a circle that is hovering up above the slope part of the roof, right? So it's at this level, it's on a horizontal plane. From a top view, I can see kind of where it lines up. And I'm gonna think about mechanicals in a building where you live. If you go look out on the roof, you're gonna notice that you have pipes and things coming up. You have different vents for HVAC, for plumbing, for different systems in your house. Businesses do, so that's very, very common, right? So I'm going to extrude basically a pipe that looks like it goes down to the roof. Now, hang on just a second. I actually need to do something to make this illustrate more, and I did this in class. So I'm going to turn on a tool called Shell. You can search for it so you know what it looks like, Shell. I'm going to choose the Shell tool, okay? And the Shell tool opens up, and it says Faces to Remove. So I'm going to click on the bottom, and it's going to remove the bottom face, and it's going to remove that face and then scoop out material to leave behind a uniform thickness based on all of the other faces. Now, depending on that thickness, I just changed that to 1 inch, you know, kind of change the effect and how much material has to be left behind. My goal is to kind of leave just a very, very thin shell. So I'm just doing 1/10 of an inch, and I can see the whole profile from underneath, right? So I wanted you guys to kind of see underneath, so this isn't, you know, this big, thick, solid thing, but it's really just kind of more of a thin shell of a shape. All right, so that's going to help out here a little bit. So now we're going to extrude this downward. All right, so what I wanted to illustrate, I think it flipped around to the opposite side that I really want it to be on, so can I? Anyway, there you go. Sorry about that. Just wasn't orientating the way I want. As I bring this down, notice when it touches, that's not the big deal. It turns red. That's just Onshape saying, hey, I think you might want to add these two parts together. And I'll leave it on new, so it's a different color. But once this part makes contact, if you think of this as being a pipe that's sticking out of the roof, hopefully you realize we would not want this gap. We would want to see that this pipe goes all the way down to the roof, the whole thing, right? So I can pull this down further, right? That works. Well, let's take a peek from underneath. So from underneath, this extrusion is extruding the circle everywhere the same distance. There is a way to get this extrusion to match the roof and to stop at the surface of the roof. It can also stop at other things. That would require that one side of the circle would stop extruding higher up than the other side. You know, this side on the lower part of the slope would have to keep coming down further, right, since the roof's sloping away. And the upper part of the roof, this side of the circle, would have to stop extruding. So there is a way to do that. Remember we had this blind word we pointed out earlier? Well, in that drop down, there is a option up to next. Up to next literally means extrude through space until you run into something. In this case, let's peek underneath. Right? You don't see it poking out. But the lower side, right, it went all the way down to the bottom of the roof. So why did the upper side not keep coming, right? Well, because it's hitting the roof, and so once any area of this hits something, it stops extruding. But the area in here that did not hit anything will keep on going until it hits something. So up to next, pretty cool. So let's rename that extrusion. Up to next. Okay. Now I'm going to repeat that and just choose a different option in that same menu. So we will sketch on this plane. I will use a circle. Oh wait, shoot, what did I click? I meant to choose sketch. I clicked extrude. So let's add a second circle. It'll be like another mechanical pipe. And we'll extrude that one. And we'll go down again. All right, so this one, we're kind of going in the right direction. Instead of up to next, we're going to say up to face. Now with up to face, it's not extruding. That's because it's waiting for us to select the face that will define how far this goes. You could choose the top of the roof, in which case it would go to that and we'd get the same result as up to next. But you could also choose a different face. Right? What if we want that pipe to go through the roof and get to the height on the inside of the building of the very bottom of the roof, right here? So we could choose that face. It doesn't have to make contact with that face. That face just acts as a reference plane to kind of control where the extrusion stops. So that geometry is controlling the length of the extrusion. We're not putting in a number, a value of 2 or 3 inches. It's just extruding until it gets to that level. Okay? So I can accept that. So there are 2 different extrude settings that we wanted to add. So instead of using blind and a distance up to face, we're using geometry. Now, just like that, there are some other options here where you can kind of go, instead of using a face, you can use up to a part, a specific part in your Part Studio. You could choose a specific point, like a vertex, all these different things. So if I chose vertex, right, a vertex has not been selected. So what if I chose, say, that point? Right, there's a point. It's controlling kind of the distance, the height distance between that profile and that point, and you can see it stops. So wasn't gonna go through and leave all those, but whoop. Here, if I just cancel, there you go. I'll just cancel the changes, it'll go back to what I had. So, all right. Now, in some classes, that is as far as we got. So, next step, in some classes, we started a new tab, new Part Studio tab called Loft. And we just did the most basic loft to get started here. And I hid the top in the right plane just to kind of illustrate what the loft is. So in my menu of tools, you've got Extrude, Revolve, Sweep, Loft is the fourth one. So at the basic premise, Loft is really a great tool to transition between shapes. So it takes two different shapes, two different sketches. So if you remember how to make a parallel plane to a given plane, we have a plane tool. And offset is the first one that pops up, but that's the one I want to get a parallel plane. I showed this by just creating a second offset plane. Created a second plane that's parallel to my front. And then I'm going to do two sketches, one on each plane. And what's special about this is that I'm not going to have the same shape. Okay, so I'm going to make a rectangle on plane 1, and then on plane 2, which is my front, I'm going to make a circle. Now, I'll look at this kind of orthographically because I'm going to make this really easy on Onshape. I'm not going to ask for anything too complicated. I'm going to have these two shapes fairly, pretty much lined up and very similar sizes to each other. All right? So you can see those are not in the same plane. They can't be in the same plane and side by side. It won't work. They have to be in separate planes that are, they don't actually have to be parallel, but this is a really simple explanation and illustration. So, but they need to be non-coplanar. All right, and so I'm going to turn on the Loft tool, and you literally just click one shape and then click the other, and you get a result. And this one worked out really nice. I had things lined up pretty nice. And so the basic idea of a loft is to transition from one shape to another. Okay. My second sketch was a circle. And so the only other thing I did is I added some points to my circle. And I did these top and bottom, left and right on purpose. Instead of maybe like upper right, not top, but kind of like diagonally, I wanted these points to not really align to my rectangle, but to be fairly evenly spaced. Okay? Why did I do that? Well, sometimes when it lofts, it doesn't exactly know how to take a vertex from one shape and kind of where to map it to the other shape as it creates that transition. Right? It has to start off with some kind of edge vertex. It is obviously trying to morph into something that's more smooth on the other end. So, in guiding this, inside the Loft menu, there is a button or an option here, a checkbox called Connections. If I click that checkbox, I can see the connections that Onshape made on its own, basically where it's mapping the vertex of a rectangle to a point somewhere on the circle. Now, how it picked those points, right? I don't know, just kind of what was mostly straight ahead. But sometimes you have geometry where Onshape just doesn't predict well. It doesn't really know what to do. It's kind of confused. It's not giving you the result you want. And what I find is that I can turn on connections, and I select one point, kind of one vertex of each shape, and that begins the process of Onshape kind of understanding what I'm guiding. Now, because I didn't put a point as close to that one as possible, it's going to create kind of a twisting effect a little bit in this transition. So I'm going to click this point, and you can see that as that maps over here, it almost gives, it's not a spiral, but it gives somewhat of a twisting kind of motion. So now maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, right? So maybe the fix to that would be, hey, I really want that point more over here. Okay. In that case, it's right. It's kind of using where those points are relative to each other. I don't know. I'll be honest. I don't know that I need all these other points. I don't know that those. I don't know that it holds true to that. But as you change where that point is, right, you're going to see it kind of does follow on the rest of them, right? That it's not mapping straight. That it's kind of following a similar kind of offset down to the other shape. So that's as far as we got. That's a quick intro to the basic loft and a connection command. And so if you got behind or absent, if you recreate all this at home, you'll be exactly where we are in class.